Good day everyone, we are the Group 9 and for today's report, we are going to report the important contributors to criminology. So what are we waiting for? Let's now dig it up. So for the starter, let's hop on to the Enlightenment era, which the classical school of thoughts, which we have the forerunners. So the classical school usually refers to the 18th century work during the Enlightenment. It was created of such reform as the Italian Cesare Beccaria and the Englishmen Sir Samuel Romilly, John Howard, and Jeremy Bentham. Their main objective was to mitigate legal penalties and subject judge to the principle of nulla poena sine lege and humanize penal law. The classical school of thought was premised on the idea that people have free will in making decisions and that punishment can be the deterrent for crime, so as long the punishment is proportional, fits the crime, and is carried out promptly. So first of the forerunners, we have Cesare Beccaria, an Italian criminologist and economist, born on March 15, 1738 and died November 28, 1794. So Cesare Beccaria was the most notable advocate of classical criminology. He theorized that people want to achieve pleasure and avoid pain, and that free will leads them to the choose between criminal or legitimate solution to meet and satisfy their needs. So his opinions were produced by studying the writers of the 18th century French Enlightenment, the encyclopedists, especially Baron de Montesquieu. His principal work is Essay on Crimes and Punishment, in which he claimed against the severities and abuses of criminal law, especially capital punishment and torture. The work became exceedingly popular and was translated into all the European languages. The writings of Beccaria stimulated and provided a pilot for reforms in the penal codes of many European nations, as well as the United States. He was among the first to promote education as a means of lessening crime. So next, we have Samuel Romilly, an English lawyer and law reform. He served as Chancellor of Durham from 1805 to 1850 and was a member of Parliament beginning in 1806. A supporter of social and political views of the Swiss Enlightenment philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Romilly devoted his life to advocating on behalf of the lower classes and worked to reform England's criminal law by abolishing capital punishment for minor crimes. Next, we have John Howard, an English philanthropist and penology reform and public health. John Howard was an 18th century English philanthropist who made significant contribution in prison reform. Despite personal tragedy and an oppositional social climate, he became an early promoter of human treatment for prisoners. And the last one, we have Jeremy Bentham, an English philosopher, economist, and theoretical jurist, the earliest and chief expounder of utilitarianism. Jeremy Bentham in 1780 he published an introduction to the principle of moral and legislation, whereby he proclaimed his famous principle of utility. A contemporary of Beccaria, was one of the most renowned 18th century intellectuals on crime. He argued that the nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. Bentham believed that the morality is that which promotes the greatest happiness of the greatest number, a praise that was also common to Beccaria. The duty of the state in Bentham's view was to promote happiness of the society by punishing and rewarding. And now let's move forward to the Holy Three of the Criminology. Holy Three of Criminology are Cesare Lombroso, Raffaele Garofalo, and Enrico Ferri. Cesare Lombroso, an Italian criminologist also known for Father of Criminology. To Cesare Lombroso, he was a doctor who served much of his career in an Italian army. He was the most ardent proponent of positive criminology, which focused more on biological determinism and critical anthropology. Considered to be the father of modern criminology, he was recognized as such, being the first person to study about crimes and criminals and conducted research on the different aspects about criminology. Next, we have Raffaele Garofalo, an Italian criminologist and a jurist. He traced the root of criminal behavior to psychological feature which he called moral anomalies. According to Garofalo, that natural crimes are those that offend the basic moral sentiments of probity, respect for the property of others, and pity, revulsion against the infliction of suffering on others. And for the last member of the Holy Tree of Criminology, we have Enrico Ferri, an Italian criminologist, socialist, a student of Cesare Lombroso. He is best known as Lombroso's associate and received prominence in 1880s. Enrico Ferri, a student of Lombroso, believes that the social as well as biological factors played a role. He held the beliefs that criminals should not be held responsible for the factors causing their criminality were beyond their control. Lombroso's biological theory have since been rejected by criminologists, with control groups not used in his studies. So moving forward to the other important contributors to criminology. In here we have Krafft-Ebing Richard von, a German psychiatrist and author of the foundational work Psychopathia Sexualis. A German neuropsychologist, well known for his pioneering studies in sexual psychopathology. He published Psychopathia Sexualis, a compilation of case histories of sexual deviation, which was translated into many languages. Krafft-Ebing also investigated the legal and genetic aspect of criminal behavior and was often consulted by the courts about sexual deviant behavior. He made initial discovery about such condition as epilepsy and found a relationship between syphilis and general paralysis. He investigated paranoia and explored hypnotism as a method of treating the mental ill. His work on psychiatry, criminology, and forensic psychopathology greatly helped the advanced psychology as a clinical science. Next, we have Feuerbach Paul Johann Anselm von, a German jurist and philosopher who originated the psychological coercive or intimidation theory, an important personage in German criminal law. Feuerbach believed that law is essential independent of morality, and he opposed vindictive punishment. His views were in materials from in the Bavarian Criminal Code in 1813, which was adopted by many other German states. He was influenced in obtaining the abolition of torture in Bavaria in 1806 and laid the foundation for the later adoption of public legal proceeding. He was also one of the first to write study on criminal psychology. His work consists of the Critique of Natural Rights and the famous textbook of common law in Germany. So Hans Eysenck, a British psychologist, argued that the psychological factors such as extroversion and neuroticism made a person more likely to commit criminal acts. He also included a psychoticism dimension that embraces traits similar to the psychopathic profile developed by Hervé M. Clockley and later Robert Hare. He also derived his model on early parental socialization of the child. His approach bridges the gap between biological explanation and environmental or social learning based approaches. So in here we also have Adolphe Quetelet, a Bulgarian astronomer. He is a Bulgarian mathematician made use of data and statistical analysis to gain insight into a relationship between crime and sociological factors called moral statistic. Adolphe Quetelet made use of the data and statistical analysis to gain insight into the relationship between crime and sociological variables. He determined that age, gender, education, poverty, and alcohol consumption were important factors related to crime. Moving on, we have Henry Matthew, a author. He used empirical methods and an ethnographic approach to address social question and poverty and presented his study in London labor and the London poor to justify his findings. We also have Émile Durkheim, a French sociologist, viewed crime as an inevitable and expected aspect of society, with an even distribution of wealth and other difference among people. He introduced to anatomy theory, which accordingly, crime is a normal part of society. Crime creates social solidarity, and crime creates social changes. Next, we have Willem Adriaan Bonder, a Dutch criminologist regarded as an emotional authority in criminology, who classified crimes by motives of the offender as economic crimes, sexual crime, political crime, and miscellaneous crime, which begins as a principal motive. William Bonder is a Marxist socialist, on the other hand, placed more emphasis on working about crimes of economic gain. He believed that the profit motive of capitalism generates an egoistic personality, hence crime is an inevitable outcome. Edwin Sutherland. He is an American authority in criminology who wrote in his book entitled Principle of Criminology, considers criminology at present as not a science, but it as a hope of becoming a science. It is the most important criminology in the 20th century because of explaining crime and criminal behavior can be seen as corrected extension of social perspective. He was considered as the dean of modern criminology, advocated the DAT, differential association theory, which maintains the society in composed of different group of organization, group of people having criminalistic tradition and anti-criminalistic tradition, and criminal behavior is learned and not inherited. People learn criminal attitude from older, more experienced law violation. Next, we have David Abrahamson. Wrote his book Crime and the Human Mind in 1945, explained the origin of crime by his formula. Criminal behavior is a result of criminalistic tendency plus crime emotional resistance to temptation. Next, we have Alphonse Bertillon, a French police officer, one who originated a system of classifying criminal according to body measurements. Because the human skeleton is unchangeable after the 20th year, and because no two individuals are alike in all dimensions, he introduced this method of identification. Next, we have Thomas Hobbes, a philosopher. In 1651, he published in Lubaton described men as neither good nor bad. Hobbes assumed that men are creatures of their own choice who want certain things and who fight when their desires are in conflict. People generally pursue their self-interest such as material gain, personal safety, and social reputation, and make enemies without caring if they harm others in the process. Since people are determined to achieve their self-interest, the result is often conflict and resistance without a fitting government to maintain safety. Next, we have Hans Eysenck, a psychologist who proposed the biosocial arousal theory. Eysenck's theory of personal focused on temperament, which he believes were largely controlled by genetic influence. He utilized a statistic technique known as factor analysis to identify what he believed were the two primary dimensions of personality, extroversion and neuroticism. Moving on to the next slide, we have Charles Goring, a British criminology who proposed the idea that criminals are shorter, weightless, and mentally defective. Wrote The English Convict, a Statistical Study, 1930. Next, we have Simon Freud, a psychologist who pioneer of psychoanalysis and psychological theory, theorized the Oedipus complex and the Electra complex, coined the term ID, superego, ego, sex drive, and libido. Moving on, we have Travis Hirschi, an American sociologist. He developed the social bond theory, wrote The Causes of Delinquency in 1969, co-authored A General Theory of Crime in 1990 with Michelle Gottfredson. Also have David Matza, an American sociologist. His research field included deviant behavior, social changes, poverty, and working class life. He is best known for co-authoring with Gershom Sykes' technique of neutralization. Gershom Sykes, American psychologist, who's known for his contribution to the study of delinquency and prison. He collaborated with David Matza in 1957 and proposed technique of neutralization. We also have Walter Reckless, an American criminology, introduced the containment theory of delinquency and crime. His containment theory of criminology, which stated that juvenile delinquency commonly arises from the breakdown in moral and social forces that otherwise contain deviant behavior. Next, we have Howard Becker, a criminologist and social psychologist, primary theorist in labeling, wrote Outsider's Study in the Sociology of Deviance. Becker has made contribution to the sociology of deviance, sociology of art, and sociology of music. Becker also wrote extensively in sociological writing style and methodologies. Also, we have Karl Marx, a European theorist whose view of the history of society as a class struggle and capitalism as a two-class system of the ruling elite and the proletariat inspired many scholars and revolutionaries. Marxist criminology is a theory of attempts to explain crime through a premise of Marxism. Marxist criminology says during the struggle of resources in capitalism, crime emerged as those as the bottom content for social, political, and economic equality. And for the last contributor, we have Willem Bonder, a Dutch theorist, endorsed the Marxist view of class conflict and wrote Criminality and Economic Condition. William Adrian Bonder was a preeminent Dutch criminologist and scholar whose pioneering research transcended the landscape of criminological thought of the historical juncture when biological-based explanation of crime predominated. And that's the end of our report. Those people are the important contributors to the criminology. Thank you guys for listening. Bye.